Hi everyone, how are you? You've been asking me many legal questions on my apps through email, and guess what? I'm not an attorney, so I've always had to turn you guys away and say, I can't really answer legal questions, I don't do that. But guess what? Just for you guys, I have a real live attorney, Steve Pipenger. He's been practicing law in New York for 10 plus years, and he's going to answer all our questions. And by the way, I have so many questions that I've saved from all of you guys, and I'm going to ask him. So thank you for being on my YouTube channel, Steve.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's say I get sued. No, let's not give that example. Let's say someone gets sued, someone else. What should they do? What steps should they take?
If somebody sues you, depending on how much it is, suppose someone sues you for $1,000, and suppose it's your next door neighbor. I would hope that your next door neighbor would not have hired an attorney for $1,000.
Yeah.
In that kind of instance, you could do a couple things. You call up your neighbor and say, "Look, what's this all about? If I give you $200, will you go away?" Right? That's one thing you could do.
Yeah. Wait, but then they will just, the next day, they'll say yes, and the next day they'll sue you again.
Well, and that leads to the next option. You could go to court and say, well, let me step back. The way somebody institutes a lawsuit, they file what's called, or they go to the court and they buy what's called an index number, which is the numbers so the court knows what's what. You have something called a summons and you have something called a complaint. A summons is a document that comes with the complaint that says, you've got this complaint, you have so many days to answer it. And the answer is a response to the complaint, where you admit or deny certain things. So you get a complaint. The other scenario is, let's just assume there's no lawyers involved yet. You answer it, meaning you look at the complaint, Alex did this, Alex did this, Alex did this. He therefore owes
the other person.
Okay, sorry, Alex.
The other person did that.
Yeah, person A did this, person A did that, person A blah, 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 blah. Person A owes person B $1,000. You deny it all, and then you send that to the other person. That's as an answer, and then you take that answer and you go file it to court.
You filed it at the county court?
Well, whatever court it is. In New York City, it would be the small claims court, because anything 5,000 and below is at the small claims court.
And that's for business and civil?
Period. I won't get into the different levels of courts in terms, it's not that important for this. So you answer, you serve, which means send, to give to another party, and the parties in the lawsuit are the plaintiff and the defendant, or in small claims it's the claimant and the defendant. To give them is to serve it, whether you send it by mail, whether you give it to them in person, whatever. And then once those two things, once there's been a complaint, once there's been an answer, in the small claims context, typically what will happen is the court will give you a court date to go to court, and it's like Judge Judy. That's a perfect example of small claims court. Now, it's not quite that fun or theatrical, but that's gives you a feel. There's nothing formal. It's you tell the judge your story, you tell the judge your story.
So it's really like that.
It's really like that.
Seems a little bit unorganized.
Yes, I've actually served as an arbitrator in small claims court, so that's what it is. It's each person gives their story, and you as the judge you take a look at the evidence and you make judgments based on the evidence. So in the small claims context, it's just the people. That's what happens. The worst thing you can have happen is that you do what's called a default. A default means someone gives you a complaint. The worst thing you can do is ignore it, not answer it. If you don't answer it within a certain amount of time, they can go to the court and say, "Hey, court, the person hasn't answered. I would like a default judgment." The court will give a default judgment. Then they can go and levy your bank accounts without you even knowing. Now,
Did you say levy my bank account?
Yeah, they can go to the
What is
bank.
that term? Can you explain that term for people?
You have a judgment where the court says this person is entitled to X dollars. Take that to a bank and say, "Hi, bank. Tell me if person A, whom I sued, has bank accounts here. And if they do, you say, okay, I want the money in the bank account."
I didn't realize that was possible that easily.
Yes, they'll freeze it.
Oh, they won't give it to them, but they'll freeze it.
They'll freeze it. And they'll freeze it typically. And some banks require what's called a turnover order, where you have to actually go back to the court, and the court will order the bank to give the money.
Got it.
Okay. But again, without getting into that,
Yeah.
that process, if you don't default, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. So the most important thing is to answer that thing. However.
Yes.
Yeah.
And again, and typically what happens is if somebody hires a lawyer, the lawyer serves the summons and complaint to the defendant gets it, they go to their lawyer, and that lawyer will call up the other lawyer and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to answer, but give me an extension of time. And typically what happens is there's extensions of time, because sometimes a lawyer gets a complaint right before it's due, because sometimes people just sit on it.
Yeah, people think like, oh, the lawyer will take care of it
Yes.
once I go.
Yes.
They don't realize the lawyer needs time.
So typically, it's best to answer. Now, the more money it is, the more complicated obviously it is, because it becomes an exchange of documents, which is called discovery, generally called discovery. And that can be time consuming, particularly when you're in what's called the Supreme Court in New York. Now, New York's kind of messed up, but that the lowest court's the Supreme Court, the highest court's not the Supreme Court. But anyway, and it can take time. Lawsuits typically in New York that I've seen, even when you think it's open shut, a year, 2 years, 3 years, I've seen 5 years, 9 years. But your question was, what do you do? I think what you do is make sure you don't default, because then, it becomes a kind of a battle of the wills.
So essentially, if you have some money, probably it's best to call a lawyer because he knows the procedures. And if you don't have money, you kind of you go to your county, your local court.
You can actually, typically in New York City, you can go to the clerk's office in the county, wherever it is, and they usually have an attorney you can talk to. They can't give you legal advice necessarily, but they'll say, here's what you have, here's the procedure.
If you have specific questions on this, of course, Steve provides a 30-minute free consultation. You can reach him at Pipenger Law, and if you're not sure about how to spell that, there's going to be a description link in the description of the video to it, so check that, and all his contact information is there as well. So thank you for watching.